Lupe, the legendary bullfighter of his era, is waking up from a scarce sleep, and a vision of a woman is rushing through his head. His servant comes into his room with a cigarette and a cup of coffee to help him out of bed. But Lupe takes a lot of time before he sits up and looks into the mirror. There, he sees a crooked, disfigured version of himself that largely resonates with his inner self, and a text written in red that reminds him again of the woman in his thoughts. His servant tries so hard to make him come back to his senses, but a tide of anger and anxiety suddenly hits Lupe, who grabs a gun and rushes outside of his hotel room. His objective is simple, cruel, and radical. The thoughts of the woman are too painful to endure, and to end them, he is going to murder her. Hurriedly, he steps inside an apartment building, trying to understand the heads and tails of the gun he is holding. The servant is again putting a lot of effort into stopping him from this crazy task, but in the end, all he can do is help Lupe get a grasp of how his gun works. Finally, the man walks slowly into a poorly decorated room, and we finally see the face of the woman, whose vision haunts Lupe painfully. Her name is Lupe, and she is unusually calm in the face of an obsessive man and a gun. Another girl is sleeping beside her. She doesn't hear Lupe, so when the latter raises his gun and points it at her, she's still sound asleep. Lupe calmly tells him to go away. She shows no sign of fear and looks at this situation as if she were already accustomed to it. Perhaps this isn't Lupe's first time walking in like this with a gun in his hand. When the moment ends and the latter realizes he cannot pull the trigger, he crouches down for a while, then stands up and leaves quietly. When walking out, he tells his manager that perhaps he should stop trying to kill her since, clearly, he has no power to do it. When their car appears in the corner, Lupe walks out of the building, wearing a red dress, and slowly follows the trail of the car. Later that day, Lupe walks out of his hotel and meets a crowd of ragged children. This time he is well dressed up, and for the first time, we clearly see the admiration people have for him. The event that played out earlier needs a lot of explanation and context, so when his car drives away, he starts reminiscing about his past. His story is told from the perspective of his first manager, Pepe Camara. When Lupe first came to him, he had nothing. With a poor stomach and no money in his pocket, he left his recently bankrupted family to seek his destiny. In this memory, Lupe is a clumsy, shy young man, looking up to the giants of the bullfighting industry. He comes to Cordoba to demonstrate his abilities to Pepe and Don Enrique de Ahumada. Both saw something in him that day. Years after this moment, Pepe will remember that in Lupe's yet unexperienced movements, he saw something that makes a great torero, something that very few young men have, a loving attitude towards demise. Pepe gives him a ride from Cordoba afterwards. He has decided to take him under his wing, but first he has to introduce this young man to his 3 rules. If Lupe wants to strive towards becoming a legendary bullfighter, he must first always listen to his manager, no matter what. Second, strip his life from easily achievable pleasures, such as So far, Lupe has no objections, but Pepe's 3rd rule is almost impossible to obey, even in imagination. And the rule is simple: there must be no women in Lupe's life. Demise must have no contender in Lupe's heart. Fast forward to present time, Lupe visits his mother. He walks inside his old house, and from the conversation between him and his mother, we learn that Lupe was once Lupe's girlfriend. There was no love for her in Lupe's family. Even today, his mother calls her a whore. With a grimaced face, Lupe greets the rest of his family, and in the next scene, as he writes checks for them, Lupe enters his room in the hotel. She acts as if it were her home. When Lupe ends his generous money giving, he calls his hotel room, knowing that Lupe will be there to pick him up. It is an act of obsession, and the family watches as he hangs up. Lupe didn't answer. Now we are transported back in time again to see how the lovers met. Lupe and Pepe are walking out of the fancy hotel through a revolving door when Lupe first lays his eyes upon her. Her gorgeousness grabs his entire being, and he fails to exit. Lupe is perfectly aware of this, and the two engage in a play of catch with a moving glass between them. Their simple and quick connection is strong and intimate, so that when Lupe finally leaves the hotel, all he can think of is the woman he just mentioned. Pepe tries to destroy his fanaticism, though he knows that woman well. She's a whore, and Lupe has nothing in common with her. She is not for him. Despite this mini lecture, however, Lupe decides to break 2 of Pepe's rules at the same time. He disobeys his manager and goes after a woman. In Manilo's eyes, approaching a bull would be much easier than approaching this woman. He takes a long time to get to her, and once he finds himself beside her by the counter, words start falling from his grasp. He falls silent until Lupe takes the first step towards him. They have a slow conversation in which Manilo, like a kid who doesn't know how to act, still regains his charm, and in which Lupe openly expresses her opinion about bullfighting. From her point of view, it's a sport made for people who are numb inside. Despite this, however, Lupe asks her to see him fight the next day. The invitation was rejected initially, but Lupe says she'll come to see him get dressed. Back to the present now, the phone is ringing, and Lupe rushes down to be the first one to answer. He knows it's Lupe, but his mother gets there first and hangs up rudely. She says it wasn't Lupe, but Manolo is too smart to believe her words. He exits the house then and is met with a crowd of journalists, asking him about his upcoming performance. They are saying that today, Manolo will go up against Dominguin, a bullfighter who claims to be the future of the sport, while calling Lupe a talisman from the past. Manolo acts unworried, though. Traveling in the past again, we see that Lupe really came to see him get dressed. Even though Pepe is categorically against her arrival, Manolo lets her in and watches her as she makes her way slowly towards him. All eyes are frozen to her gracious movement, but her eyes are locked on only Manolo. His scars particularly grasp her attention, and Manolo is led to recall how he got them one by one. All the while, Pepe is watching this interaction in terrible apprehension. He knows nothing good will come of it, so when Manolo asks her to attend the performance and Lupe agrees, he decides to catch Lupe in private and make her leave. He uses money at first, insulting her, but Lupe throws the cash back at him and leaves after hearing that her being there will surely have a bad influence on Lupe. And so, that day, from her balcony, Lupe listens to the radio, speaking about his performance and imagining his graciousness, and finds herself slowly falling in love. A short time later, Manolo comes to her himself. He didn't see her among the crowd, and he wants to know why. Lupe quickly answers that something came up, and even though it isn't enough of an explanation, Manolo yields back and takes a good look around Lupe's apartment. He says he fought for her, he imagined him in the audience, and even though she wasn't there, he performed for her. Manolo looks anxious, but his words hit the mark. A short time later, he finds himself watching Lupe cook for him, and his eyes quit taking orders from his brain. This is why, in the next scene, he peeks inside the dressing room of a clothing shop. For the first time in his life, Lupe, the living legend and maestro, finds himself unable to control himself. Lupe notices this, of course, but she finds it to be funny. The next day, despite Pepe's obvious opposition, she leaves her tiny apartment and her narrow street and moves in with Lupe. She has dinner with the whole company of men associated with Manolo, and afterwards, we see her getting along with everybody. Seeing her there makes Lupe extremely happy. We couldn't say the same about Pepe, though. He approaches Lupe to ask her why she's here after being asked to get lost. Her answer is sharp, she did get lost, but she was found. In the next scene, she sees Lupe's fight for the first time, and to her surprise, she finds that it only made her confused. She doesn't know when to applaud or what to feel. The hidden beauty of the face-off between a torero and a bull is unknown to her yet, so Lupe feels responsible to tell her about a secret, subtle game he likes to play with the bull. He takes off his coat and starts moving like a bullfighter. At first, all the bull sees are a coat, but after 20 attempts, he starts looking at his ankles. Time passes, and now Bull starts watching his knees, a few more, and the bull sees the torero himself. This is when the face-off becomes truly thrilling. Shortly after, Lupe and Lupe are in bed, and the maestro finds himself being swallowed by an overwhelming emotion. This is a feeling he isn't familiar with. For the first time, he's fascinated by life, not demise. The next day, they visit Don Enrique de Ahumada at his villa. Enrique doesn't show it to Manolo, of course, but he and Pepe exchange looks that clearly agree on one thing. This woman is the greatest danger opposing Manolo's career. That day, when Lupe and Lupe are resting peacefully, talking about their bleak future, suddenly, Pepe arrives, holding a piece of paper. It is a job offer, and quite a profitable one. And so, when Manolo finishes reading it, he asks Lupe if she wants to fly far, far away. The job offer seemed to be from Mexico, and Manolo's appearance caused an explosion of interest among the entire population there. We see them strolling on a beach in the next scene, when, overwhelmed by how well everything is going in his life, Manolo proposes to Lupe. He is rejected, though. Lupe doesn't regard herself as worthy, she thinks Manolo should find somebody nicer, a woman his mother will approve of. Lupe tries to avert his eyes from Lupe's gaze now. He's hurt and doesn't want to show it. The two decide to stay in Mexico then. People already seem bored with Lupe here, and this sudden decline in his popularity gives him a taste of freedom he has never experienced before. He's watching Lupe sleep in the next, drawing her attention. The moment is peaceful, and time seems almost frozen. But for some reason, instead of acting normally, time slowly starts going back and the visions of his bloody career start floating around in Manolo's consciousness. Lupe wakes up then. She doesn't see a single sign of distress on her lover's face, but the insides of Manolo are now filled with images of fame, of his tragic theatrical performances, and, of course, of demise. It is no wonder that night he's tormented by the dreams in which he finds himself deceased. Lupe notices him, staring at the ceiling with a blank face, and asks him what is wrong. Demise is her main rival in Manolo's heart, and Lupe also knows that, as long as Manolo is afraid of it, he will never forget Demise. Now, during this intimate moment, Lupe does everything to make him forget by showing him her love. She's not completely sure, however. Perhaps, in trying to turn his attention away from Demise, She's making everything worse for Lupe. The next morning, cold and sickly Lupe, who's tormented by dreams and seems to have not slept at all, is getting dressed to go out and perform. Lupe is anxious to make him reconsider. He can postpone it. At this point in his career, he is able to even retire. He's already the best of all time, the legend of the sport who has no rival whatsoever. Why not retire? To make his argument even stronger, Lupe, who initially declined Manilo's proposal, now tells him to get married and have kids. He uses everything she can offer to make him reconsider, but Manilo seems cold. Using the weak argument that he's responsible for the people who are associated with him, he tries his best to avoid this discussion. And here, Lupe realizes something dire. Demise is the real wife of Lupe, while she herself is just his mistress. Lupe leaves, and Lupe's eyes follow him across the hallway. No love and care are emanating from those eyes this time. She is planning to make him pay. During the fight that day, Lupe peeks at Lupe from time to time and sees her chatting with another man. He finds himself slowly losing control until he sees Lupe leave the area together with the man she was speaking with, and now all Manilo wants is demise. The fight ends with an injury. Lupe enters the field hospital in the next scene, where a bunch of men are gathered around Lupe. When she arrives, the people step away from the room and give the couple some privacy. Lupe tries to show some care, but Manilo is eager not to accept any of it. A huge fight is about to begin. Lupe left with another man. This is the thing that enraged Manilo the most. While Lupe says that she only had a drink with him, she couldn't help. The man was amusing. At least he didn't want to expire like Manilo. This makes Manilo's anger even worse. She is the main reason he wants to be sent to the afterlife so much. When he saw them exit the arena, all he wanted was to be gone. And besides, he's not so sure Lupe only had a drink with him. He calls her terrible words now, and Lupe doesn't know what else to do but slap him. She's accustomed to men calling her names, but she never thought she would hear those words from Manilo's mouth. In the end, after all the anger and bitterness they've been holding onto for so long are expressed, both feel unusually closer to one another. This feeling quickly fades away, however, and Manilo's leg is bleeding, so they return to the examination table. Manilo realizes here that the dream he had of a life together with Lupe may never become reality. A sudden thing happens then. In the next scene, a denunciation is filed against Lupe. A man informs the police that the woman Lupe is with is a communist with a dark past who was married before. Of course, the influence of Lupe bails her out of jail, but he is also informed about everything. He hears now that Lupe's real name is Antonia, that she was a communist, and that she was once married to a Mexican. This is how the special bond is severed between Lupe and Lupe, and this is the end of Manilo's backstory. Now, we get back to the present and see him prepare for the fight that will define his destiny. Lupe also gets into a car to spectate the upcoming thrilling performance. It is clear that, for some reason, she is filled with terrible apprehension. Meanwhile, Lupe is standing by the window when Dominguin and an army of his fans walk by. Manilo has already passed the time of overwhelming attention, so he can do nothing but smile and light his cigarette. Seeking the fuss around the upcoming star of bullfighting, Pepe cannot help but suggest canceling the event. But there is no way on earth Lupe would agree on that. And so, his small company quietly follows one of Dominique's loud ones. The maestro is ushered into a shrine in the next scene to pray. There, Manilo addresses Mother Mary, asking her to let him see another day. But this complicated prayer seems forced and lacking significant faith. Manilo looks around the cold house of prayer and suddenly finds himself trembling in the face of what is about to come. As if he felt Demise breathing coldly on his shoulder, his breathing became rapid. But the event must be held still, so he finishes up and, smoking cigarette after cigarette, goes out into the arena. While treading towards the center, his heart is beating furiously, as if he were going for his last fight. Among the crowd, he looks for Lupe's face, but she isn't there yet. Dominguin faces the bull first, and Manilo sees how much the audience loves this fresh torero. Now it's his turn, and as soon as Pepe lays eyes upon the raging bull, he understands that it is an especially dangerous one. Nevertheless, Lupe manages to satisfy the crowd as always. When he faces the bull the second time, his performance becomes exceptional. With a fine combination of risk and smart movement, he receives a standing ovation. There is no wonder. Nobody in the crowd can see or understand what is really going on in Manilo's mind right now. He's risking too much because he wants this bull to come on top as the victor in this bloody face-off. Thinking that he has nothing left in this life to fight for, he seeks heroic defeat. And there is only one person other than himself who, even though he is not there, can feel all of this from miles away. It's Lupe, driving as fast as she can to get to the arena before something bad can happen. There is perhaps no logical reason to feel this way, but tears come rushing from Lupe's eyes, and desperately, she pushes the throttle. The eye contact Lupe exchanges with the bull in the next scene is extremely intimate. He knows these eyes don't belong to a mere animal, these are the eyes of demise, and when the bull plunges in his direction, he does something unexpected, something that this crowd has scarcely seen. The Lupe and the bull engage in a dazzling rotational movement. This is a dance, and Manilo finds himself slowly getting closer and closer to the bull as they continue going round and round. Paradoxically, being this close to demise, the memories of Lupe start flashing in front of Manolete. He remembers how one night in bed, climbing up the Everest of pleasure, he called her Mamita and how he asked her never to tell anyone about it. Dominique, the young man who, before the fight, was so sure that he was the future of bullfighting, now realizes that his opponent is crazy. Even Pepe now starts to catch a glimpse of Manolo's true intention. Everyone is standing on their feet, spectating what they think is the best and most reckless performance in the history of bullfighting. Manolo gets a new sword then, and walking up towards the center again, he sees a woman coming down the stairs nearby. He moves his head rapidly to see if it's Lupe, but it turns out to be somebody else. Everything happens so fast, then. The bull engages with him a couple more times, and then the third time, both the animal and the man strike each other. People get on their feet once more, and the initial cheerful applause is quickly changed when they see blood coming out of the legendary bullfighter's crotch. Manolo is still standing, but it's clear that after a few seconds, he will lose his consciousness. The arena fills with people, and as deafening silence falls upon the entire arena, the maestro is taken away for an immediate operation. The doctor here is unable to close the wound, so they rush him out of the arena and, by foot, get him to the hospital with the help of a large crowd. By then, it is already evening, and Lupe's anxious road trip ends. She arrives at the hospital and tries to cut through the commotion created by the people who are just like her, trying to get into the hospital. It is almost an impossible business. The doctors are standing by the door, stopping anyone from entering. Meanwhile, in the operation room, Pepe whispers to Manolete, who has already lost a significant amount of blood and now rigidly lays on the examination table with a pale complexion. He whispers to him that the most experienced doctor is on his way from Madrid. Pepe brings this news in the most cheerful way, as if this mere information can be enough to cure Manolo, but the latter shares no portion of Pepe's positivity. The door opens then, and behind the anxious bullfighters, we see the face of Lupe as she enters the waiting room. It seems that she somehow managed to get by the doctors at the door, but now, before she gets to Manolete, she has one more enemy to get by, Pepe. He meets her up front, and after hearing her plead to let her in, he walks back and tells her to wait. Clearly, he has no intention of letting her inside, as some paramedics hold Lupe, and as doors open and close in front of her, she sees the face of Manolo. Meanwhile, Pepe tells Don Enrique, the person whose opinion he honors the most, that Lupe wants to see him. The latter answers that he will let her in only if Manolo asks for her. The maestro sees her, being held by the paramedics, but he's too weak to utter a word. Being on the verge of perishing, words fly out of his grasp as soon as he thinks of them. He needs an inhumane effort to grab only one of them, the one that holds the most significant place in his heart and mind, and whisper it. The word is Mamita. The second time, he says this word again, and so, when Pepe walks out of the operation room once more, he tells Lupe that Manolete is only asking for his mother. Right away, Lupe understands who he's calling. He looks inside the operation room again and remembers her promise never to let anybody know that Manolete calls her by that name. This time, no paramedic is needed to hold her down. The promise is enough to create a barrier between herself and the operation room. Tears start building up in her eyes as Manolo looks around himself, unable to say anything other than Mamita. Pepe and Lupe are sitting together in the next scene, both deep into their thoughts. Here, after one of them initiates a conversation, they find out that, despite their differences, they both feel responsible for Manolo's passing. Suddenly, the doctor from Madrid arrives, tramping towards the operation room. One glance and one simple examination are enough for him to conclude that there is no hope. The funeral procession is extremely crowded, and at the end of this long train stands a woman dressed all in black.